You are welcome to yet another episode of HN What's Your Say? The #1 listening show, where we discuss real issues with real people like you. We are still featuring R. Kelly. Real name Robert Sylvester Kelly. Also known as the R&B King. Let's talk about one of the most absurd and shallow claims ever brought against R. Kelly. The so-called allegation that he obstructed justice when he allegedly tried to retrieve a private videotape from Lisa Van Allen. Now, if you've been following his legal battles, you already know that this specific accusation didn't survive the light of day in the Chicago courtroom. The jury of 12 men and women who sat through the evidence, who weighed every word, every document and every testimony, acquitted Kelly and his co-accused of obstruction in this matter. They saw through it and they recognized that this was not obstruction at all. And yet, unbelievably, despite this acquittal, we still have a federal judge, Judge Leinenweber, who decided to turn around and ignore the jury's reasoning. Instead of respecting their verdict, he leaned on his own baseless opinion, suggesting that R. Kelly was guilty of obstruction anyway. That is not how justice is supposed to work. When the jury has spoken, when they've found a defendant not guilty, that should be the end of the matter. Anything else is a slap in the face to the very foundation of the jury system. But before we even get to that judicial overreach, let's deal with the core issue. Was R. Kelly really obstructing justice by trying to get back a tape containing deeply private and intimate material? The answer is simple: absolutely not. And here's why. First of all, let's step away from the courtroom drama for a moment and think about this as human beings. Imagine that there is a private and highly personal video of you. Something intimate and not meant for public eyes, and you find out it's in the possession of a bitter ex-partner. Not a police department. Not a court clerk. Not even a lawyer. A private citizen? Someone with no legal authority, no official duty, and perhaps their own motives for holding onto that material. Now, would it be strange, immoral, or illegal for you to want to get it back? Of course not. In fact, anyone in that position would do the exact same thing. This isn't even about fame. Whether you're a celebrity or a regular person, the natural instinct is to protect your privacy. And in R. Kelly's case, that instinct was heightened by the fact that Lisa Van Allen wasn't exactly a neutral or trustworthy figure in this situation. She was, by many accounts, unpredictable. A loose cannon, as some would put it, and someone who had every reason to use the tape for purposes far beyond the scope of any official investigation. Which brings us to the next point: for something to be considered obstruction of justice, there must be an actual legal process that you're interfering with. An investigation, a prosecution, or some official proceeding. But here's the kicker: there was no guarantee, no certainty, and frankly no evidence that Lisa Van Allen intended to hand that tape over to federal authorities in the first place. For all anyone knew, she might have been holding onto it for leverage, for blackmail, and for revenge, or for personal gain. And in fact, the way she handled it strongly suggests she was doing exactly that. Let's also be clear: retrieving personal material from a private individual is not the same thing as tampering with evidence in an active court case. If R. Kelly had been accused of paying off court clerks, shredding official records, or hacking into a police evidence locker, that would be obstruction. But here, we're talking about a private tape not under government control, not in a courtroom, and not in the hands of any law enforcement agency. To call this obstruction is a stretch so long you could wrap it around the courthouse twice. And here's the hypocrisy. When it's other high-profile figures involved, people don't call it obstruction. We've seen countless celebrities and public figures pay large sums to reclaim private photographs, videos, or documents that were taken without their consent. Entire industries of privacy lawyers and crisis management firms exist for this exact reason. Tabloids have been paid off for decades to stop publishing embarrassing images. Paparazzi photos have been bought back at eye-watering prices. Celebrities have paid to stop leaks of intimate material, and society has never treated that as criminal obstruction. At worst, it's seen as damage control. At best, it's common sense. So why is it different for R. Kelly? Why is it that when he allegedly attempts to protect his privacy, it suddenly becomes obstruction of justice? The answer lies in the prejudiced lens through which his every action has been judged. In his case, normal human behavior is twisted into sinister intent. And the saddest part is that some in positions of power, including Judge Leinenweber, have embraced this twisted narrative even when the jury flat out rejected it. Let's go back to the jury for a second. These 12 people listened to all the evidence about this supposed tape buying incident. They heard from witnesses like Lisa Van Allen. They evaluated credibility. They applied the legal standard, which is proof beyond a reasonable doubt, and they concluded that R. Kelly was not guilty of obstruction. That verdict alone should have spoken volumes. It should have closed the book on this allegation. Yet Judge Leinenweber decided to write his own ending, brushing aside the jury's findings and inserting his personal opinion. That's not justice. That's ego. And it's dangerous. Because if a judge can simply disregard a jury's acquittal and still treat the defendant as guilty, then what's the point of having a jury at all? What's the point of trials? Why pretend we care about due process if in the end a single judge can ignore the facts, the law, and the verdict in favor of his own bias? Now let's address the other side of this coin. Because if we're talking about obstruction of justice, the person whose behavior fits that description far better is Lisa Van Allen herself. Think about it. If this tape was truly important evidence in a legal investigation, her first move should have been to hand it over to the authorities. That's what a law-abiding citizen does when they have material that could be relevant to a criminal case. But that's not what happened. Instead, she allegedly kept the tape in her possession, used it as leverage, and dangled it like bait in a scheme to extract money from R. Kelly. That's not cooperating with justice. That's manipulating it for personal gain. And in doing so, she potentially delayed or diverted any legitimate investigation that might have been taking place. That's the textbook definition of obstructing justice. Interfering with the legal process for your own benefit. The difference is that the narrative around this case has been so skewed against R. Kelly that this obvious fact is ignored. Instead, the public was fed the idea that he was the one interfering, all while the actual obstructionist walked away with immunity deals and credibility she didn't deserve. It's also important to understand that the retrieval of the tape, if it happened anyway, wasn't about hiding a crime. It was about preventing misuse. Just because an intimate recording exists doesn't mean it's destined for a courtroom. In many cases, such material is never relevant to a legal case at all. It's simply private. And the law recognizes a person's right to protect their privacy even if they're accused of something. Think about how dangerous the precedent would be if we accepted the idea that reclaiming your own private property from an untrustworthy ex automatically makes you guilty of obstruction. That would mean that anyone who's ever paid to get back stolen intimate photos, anyone who's ever stopped a blackmailer, anyone who's ever tried to control the spread of sensitive personal material would be a criminal. That's not justice. That's absurdity. The Chicago jurors understood this. They weren't swayed by the sensationalism or the emotional weight of the accusation. They looked at the legal definition of obstruction, they looked at the facts, and they saw the truth. This was not obstruction of justice. It was an attempt to reclaim privacy, plain and simple. But the tragedy here is that their verdict didn't fully protect R. Kelly from the consequences of this false narrative. Because when Judge Leinenweber chose to dismiss their reasoning and rely on his own unfounded opinion, he kept the shadow of guilt hanging over Kelly's name in the public's mind. And that's the power and the danger of judicial overreach. A single judge, with a single sentence, can undermine the will of 12 jurors and rewrite the story for the history books. So let's be crystal clear. In the eyes of the law as determined by the Chicago jury, R. Kelly was not guilty of obstruction. In the eyes of common sense, trying to retrieve intimate material from an untrustworthy ex is a normal, human, and reasonable action, not a criminal one. And in the eyes of fairness, the real obstruction of justice in this situation came from the person who weaponized that tape for personal gain instead of turning it over to the proper authorities. That is all we had for you today on HN What's Your Say? To keep updated whenever we post a new video, subscribe to this channel now. Also remember to hit the bell icon and enable notifications. And feel free to share your opinions with us in the comment section below, and let us know if you would like us to publish your views in our next release. We value all our subscribers' opinions.